right, here in chapter 4, one of the shortest chapters to cover is looking at where we get drugs from, so those drug sources. So our learning objectives is just identifying what those drug sources are, describing each of those, talking about pros and cons, the terminology that goes along with them, particularly the biotech that has rDNA. We'll talk about how those are set up, synthetic drugs and how they're different from naturally occurring, and then the different minerals. So first of all, what are these drug sources? The learning objectives kind of gave those away. So first of all, we have drugs that we get from animals called zoologics, and that can include from other humans. So if we're getting drugs that are being isolated and given from one human to another, that would be an example of an animal. Biotech, so the recombinant DNA technology. We also have synthetic or labs synthesis, often just called synthetic, minerals, and then we also have plants or botanic. So looking first at the animal sources, so some of these again can be derived from humans, and these would include any fluids, tissues, glands, organs from various animals. So it could be an enzyme that gets isolated, so we're just kind of collecting fluids or specific substances from them, or it could be like a whole organ that could be being used. Again, certain enzymes, also hormones, can be isolated from one organism or one animal and given to another. This also can include some antibiotics, more antibodies than antibiotics necessarily. So again, if somebody is producing antibodies, sometimes those can be transplanted from one person to another. Vitamins, vaccines, some antiserum can also include some of these as well. So again, that antiserum that would have antibodies given from one patient to another. So some of the terminology that goes along with our animals is where it's coming from. So what kind of animal? So if it's being taken from a bird, it's called avian. Bovine is the term we use for anything taken from cattle or cows. Caprine is from goats. Equine, probably one you're familiar with, horses. Ichthoid, maybe not one you're as familiar with, is fish. Ovine is sheep, and porcine is pig. So these animal sources, just to give you some examples, these are not things that I would ask you on a test, but just to kind of relate to it. So adrenaline or epinephrine is commonly used, especially to help with blood pressure and regulating that. It's a vasoconstrictor, and it's often taken from adrenal glands from larger animals. So again, like bovine, sometimes porcine as well. So again, heparin, another example from bovine or cow lungs. So insulin, for example, a lot of its biotech we'll talk about it here in both, but sometimes it's taken from cows or pigs from their pancreas. So in that situation, it would be an animal source. Some of the concerns with animal sources are some ethical objections. So again, especially if the animal has to be euthanized or is harmed during the collection process. That's not always the case, that it would need to be, the animal would have to be euthanized in order for it to be providing the drug, but sometimes it definitely is, especially if it's coming from an organ. It could contain harmful substances. So again, transferring bacteria or viruses from one host to another. Again, can violate some cultural and religious beliefs, and it may induce the production of antibodies or an allergic reaction because, again, it's foreign. So it might be similar to an animal, but not exactly human. So then the body recognizes it as being foreign and would reject it or produce a reaction. All right, so then the biotech, this is especially with the COVID vaccine, insulin is moving into this. So again, the biotech, so this is whenever we're using recombinant DNA or abbreviated rDNA This is also genetic engineering. So again, lots of information out there about this. So this is where we're taking genetic material. So we're not just using like a hormone or an enzyme or something. Here's where we're talking about genetic information. So genetic material is taken from one source and combined with DNA of a second. So that's why it's called recombinant. So it's not DNA naturally found anywhere. We're genetically engineering it. So we're taking a gene or genes from one living thing and putting it into another. So this creates, again, DNA with some type of desired trait. So these pharmaceuticals can include like portions of DNA that are removed from the donor and combined with DNA from the host. The host cells then reproduce, and as they reproduce, that desired portion of the DNA can be disrupted and extracted. It can be purified, can be formulated for human intake. All right, so some biotech sources, insulin, this is one of the bigger ones. And what happens with biotech with insulin is that the gene, so the human gene, piece of DNA that makes the protein insulin, that gene is isolated from a human cell. It's actually added to a bacterial cell. Bacteria don't make insulin because they don't have blood sugar that they control. But those bacteria are genetically engineered to produce insulin. And bacteria reproduce like crazy. So they mass produce insulin, and then it gets purified. Again, the bacteria is broken down, it's killed. Only the insulin is being extracted from that and then injected into the patient. A lot of the vaccines, so hepatitis is listed here, but also the COVID vaccine, one of the most recent ones, and a lot more vaccines are using this rDNA technology where a gene is removed from like the virus. And so like, for example, COVID and the coronavirus. So just one gene is removed. In that case, it makes a protein called a spike protein. So the whole coronavirus isn't being inserted, but a gene from it is being added to the host. And what happens is it's added so that the host starts reproducing or starts making this protein that the virus normally would. Now, it's not making the whole virus, so it's not infecting you. It's not causing you to get COVID. But that production of that protein looks foreign. So the body is going to produce antibodies against that. So now if you do get exposed to COVID, your body recognizes that protein that it makes because your body already made it before. So again, it's a pretty cool technology. Because it's just DNA, those vaccines can be made very quickly. That's how a vaccine was able to be made relatively quickly whenever COVID first came out, compared to other vaccines that take longer time. So the rDNA, because it's just genetic information and it's being inserted into the host, so the host is making a protein that's normally made by the virus to activate that immune response. So it was really fascinating technology. We're going to see, I think, more and more, lots more of these type of vaccines being produced. So some of the benefits is it eliminates or minimizes the risk of transmission because, again, it's just giving genetic material. It's not taking fluids from somebody or even cells from somebody. It's just transmitting that piece of DNA. So then it also reduces the risk of those allergic reactions because, again, it's not going to look foreign. It's just genetic material that our body wouldn't recognize as foreign. Now, the synthetic drugs or lab synthesis, so these are drugs that are made that are not naturally found in nature. So they can be from organic or even inorganic. So it's compounds that are found in that are available, and we mix them together. So thinking about the illicit drugs, so like a meth lab. So methamphetamine is purely synthetic. That is not found in nature anywhere, but instead there are chemicals that get added together They can be very dangerous, very explosive, and that's why, unfortunately, those meth labs can blow up and cause lots of harm. But again, it's not something found in nature. We're not manipulating a drug or altering it a little bit. It's completely made by mixing chemicals together to create something. So it can resemble the naturally occurring, but it's much less expensive because, again, we're not going out and extracting it. We don't have to purify the stuff. It's being made in a lab. It's also easier. Again, we can kind of mass produce it. We're not relying on animals or plants to be reproduced or to create it. Again, larger quantities can be made. And so some examples here, one of the antibiotics actually called K-Flex or Ceflexin, especially this is used a lot with, if you have animals, this is commonly used, can be used in humans as well. But again, it's a common one for animals. So it resembles penicillin, but again, it's completely synthetic. And then Toradol, one of our non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, so it doesn't really look like anything, but it is a good pain reliever. So our mineral sources, these are inorganic things that are naturally found in the earth, can also be in water and plants. So they're divided into macro or micro minerals, and it's not the size. So macro means big, but a macro mineral is because we need big amounts of it compared to the others. So these are minerals that are necessary to maintain normal body functions. Micronutrients, again, micro means small. It doesn't mean that they're all small, but instead we just need trace amounts. We need small amounts of them. So typically these are obtained through our diet, but sometimes we need supplements, especially like iron for individuals with anemia. So they need that iron as a medication. To give you an idea of these macro and micro minerals, I'm going to list them out. You are not responsible on a test for knowing which is which. I'm just trying to help you connect to this material. So macro minerals, things like calcium, we need large amounts of calcium for good bone health. Chlorine, which we think about a pool, but we need a lot of chlorine. That's our salt, sodium chlorine. So we need that. Magnesium, phosphorus, potassium, sodium, sulfur is another example. Then our micro minerals or trace minerals, so things we still need, but just in small amounts. Cobalt, copper, fluorine for our teeth, iodine, iron. Again, somebody though with anemia that doesn't make any at all, we need to supplement that. Manganese, and selenium. And then our last one here is zinc. Not a test question, but just to kind of, in case you're wondering, there is a nice table in your book that talks about why we need some of these. So again, calcium, of course, we think about, we need that for bones, but we also need it for blood clotting and for immunity. Again, chlorine, we need that for good digestion. Magnesium for energy, that's what ATP has, magnesium in it, and the P in ATP for energy has phosphorus, so we need those. So again, those macro molecules and these micro minerals, we need them in order for our body to work properly. Some of the trace or micro minerals, again, like cobalt, we need that for our vitamin B to work properly. Copper helps with breaking down our iron. Again, fluorine for our teeth. So again, just more if you're interested or kind of curious about what these do, but again, not something I'm going to ask you on the test. All right, and then finally, our plants or the botanic. This is where the majority or lots and lots of drugs come from plants, at least originally when we think about the history of pharmacology, started off a lot with plants. So lots of them can be extracted sometimes from the same species. So we may be using one plant, but we can get or isolate different drugs from that same plant. And all the parts could potentially be used. So sometimes the protein or the drug that we're looking for is found in the roots. of it, so like ginkgo biloba. Also the like tobacco or nicotine that's coming from the leaf. So again, it could be the flower, it could be the stem, it could be any part. So again, that kind of varies based on the drug we're looking for. And just a couple examples, of course, morphine comes from from that opium poppy plant. So that's where we're getting that. Again, cocaine is actually considered a natural one. Sometimes we're modifying them a little bit, but even if we're modifying that naturally occurring one, it's still considered the plant source, not synthetic. Synthetic means we're completely mixing everything in the lab, mixing things together to make them.